They call me Grandpa Joe now, all of them, even the ones who married into this family and technically have no right to it, but I never correct them. Let me tell you something I've learned in 68 years on this earth. The things that break you rarely announce themselves. There's no thunderclap, no music swelling in the background like in the movies. There's just an ordinary Tuesday, or in my case, an ordinary Saturday afternoon in my own backyard, filled with the smell of charcoal smoke and cut grass, and then someone opens their mouth, and the life you thought you had folds up like a paper map you can never quite refold the same way again. I want you to remember that, friend, because I'm about to tell you exactly how mine folded, and exactly how I unfolded it again. My name is Walter Higgins, and for 42 years I ran a little hardware store on the corner of Route 9 and Miller Street, in a town called Bellhaven that most of you have never heard of and never will, because there's nothing here worth putting on a map except the people. I sold nails and paint and garden hoses to the same families for 4 decades, watched their kids grow up buying their first bicycle locks from me, watched some of those kids come back years later to buy paint for their own nurseries. I wasn't a rich man. I wasn't a remarkable one either, not in any way the world keeps score of. But I built something, a marriage that outlasted half the couples we started out with, a house with a crooked porch step that I never got around to fixing because my late wife, Carol, God rest her, always said the wobble kept the salesman from lingering too long. And I built 3 children, which is the thing I'm proudest of, prouder than the store, prouder than the paid-off mortgage, prouder than anything. That Saturday was my 72nd birthday, and my daughter Renee had organized the whole thing without telling me a single detail, which for Renee was an act of superhuman restraint, because that woman has never in her life kept a secret longer than it takes to walk from one room to another. She'd strung lights across the maple tree in the backyard, the same maple tree I planted the week we brought our first son home from the hospital. She'd rented folding tables and covered them in checkered cloth, and she'd talked her Uncle Pete, my brother, into grilling, which was a mistake because Pete burns everything he touches, but nobody had the heart to tell him that at 75 years old. My wife had been gone 3 years by then, and every celebration since had carried a hollow note under the happy one, like a bell that's been cracked but still rings. Still, I was surrounded. That's the thing I want you to understand before I tell you what happened, friend, because I need you to feel how full that yard was, how loud with laughter, before I tell you how quiet it got. My daughter Renee sat beside me at the head table, 40 years old now, a schoolteacher with her mother's habit of touching her earlobe when she was nervous, which she was doing constantly that day, though I didn't understand why until much later. My youngest, Tommy, 36, had driven up from the city with his wife and their new baby, the first grandchild in the family, 6 months old and already the undisputed king of that backyard. And then there was my eldest, Marcus, 38 years old. A surgeon, if you can believe it, a man who spent his days with his hands inside other people's chests, saving lives with a steadiness I never had in my own hands, not even when they were young and strong. Marcus had always been the serious one, quiet where his siblings were loud, watchful where they were careless. He'd inherited his mother's dark, careful eyes, and a way of looking at a room like he was reading it for information nobody else could see. He and I had never been close in the easy way I was close with Tommy. There was always something held back in him, some door he never quite opened for me, and for 38 years I told myself that was just his nature, the way some men are built quiet. And sitting to my right, in the seat of honor, was Douglas. Douglas Kane had been my best friend since we were 9 years old, since the day he punched a boy twice his size for calling me a name I don't care to repeat, and came away from that fight with a bloody nose and a friendship that lasted 63 years. We'd been paperboys together, army buddies for a stretch, business partners for one disastrous year running a bait shop that nearly bankrupted us both. He was the best man at my wedding to Carol. The bait shop, he was Marcus's godfather, had held him in the church the day he was baptized, had taught him to cast a fishing line before I ever got the chance. Douglas had never married, never had children of his own, and somewhere along the way, without either of us saying it out loud, my family had become the closest thing he had to one. I loved that man like a brother. I would have put my hand in a fire for him. The afternoon rolled on the way birthdays do, slow and golden, plates emptying, the baby passed from lap to lap, somebody's dog chasing a tennis ball across Renee's flower bed while she pretended not to notice. Pete's ruined burgers got eaten anyway, out of loyalty more than hunger. I remember thinking, somewhere around 4 o'clock, with the sun starting to lean west and gild the edges of everything, that this was as close to perfect as my life had gotten since Carol passed. I remember thinking I was a lucky man. Then Douglas stood up. He tapped his beer bottle with a fork, 3 sharp little clinks that cut through the noise like a blade through butter, and the yard went quiet the way a yard does when everyone senses, before they understand why, that something has shifted. Even the dog stopped barking. Even the baby, like he felt it too, went still in Tommy's arms. Douglas was smiling, but it wasn't the smile I'd known for 63 years. That smile had a crack running through it, something underneath trying to get out, and I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck before he'd said a single word. "Walter," he said, raising his bottle toward me. 63 years, buddy. That's most of a lifetime, isn't it? Most of 2, some might say. I said something light back, told him to sit down and eat before Pete's dog got to his plate, tried to wave the moment off the way you wave off a wasp at a picnic, hoping it'll just move along if you don't make a fuss. But Douglas didn't sit. He looked around the table slowly, and I watched his eyes stop, just for a heartbeat too long, on Marcus. "There's something I've been carrying a long time," Douglas said, and his voice had dropped into that low, rehearsed register that told me, with a sick lurch in my stomach, that he had practiced this. Somewhere, alone in his house, he had stood in front of a mirror and practiced destroying me. And I think today, of all days, it's finally time to put it down. Renee's hand found her earlobe again. I understood in that instant that my daughter had known something was coming, though not, I would later learn, the shape of it. "Marcus," Douglas said, turning to my son with an expression I can only describe as tender, which was the cruelest part of all, "you've spent your whole life calling this man your father. And he's been a good one, I won't take that from him. But he's not the man whose blood is in you, son, I am." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, the way I had to sit with it in real time, in my own backyard, on my own birthday, with the smell of charred hamburger still hanging in the air. I want you to imagine 63 years of friendship collapsing into 11 words spoken in front of your entire family. Marcus's face did something I will never forget as long as I live. It was like watching a house implode, all at once and from the inside, the walls falling in on themselves in perfect silence. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at Douglas, and then he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw 38 years of quiet distance suddenly make a terrible, retroactive kind of sense to him, as if he'd been handed the missing piece to a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving his entire life. "Dad," he said, and his voice cracked clean in half on that single syllable. Is he telling the truth?" Everyone was looking at me. And what? And what? And what? Renee had both hands pressed over her mouth. Tommy had gone rigid, the baby forgotten against his shoulder. Somewhere behind me I heard my daughter-in-law gasp, a short, sharp sound like something breaking. "Here is what I did not do, friend. I did not stand up and shout. I did not lunge across that table at the man who had just tried to detonate my family in front of 40 guests and a rented sound system still playing soft music no one was listening to anymore. I have had a temper my whole life, a slow-burning one, the kind that takes its time catching but burns everything once it does, and every instinct in my body was screaming to let it loose right there on Douglas Kane, but something colder took over instead. Something I didn't know I had in me until that exact moment. I felt myself go still, the way a lake goes still right before a storm hits it, and I looked at my oldest friend with an expression that must have surprised him, because his smug little smile flickered, just for a second, like he hadn't expected calm. He'd expected an explosion. He'd built his whole performance around the assumption that I would give him one. I didn't give it to him. "Sit down, Douglas," I said, and my voice came out low and even, nothing like the fire I felt underneath it. "You've had your say. Now you're going to sit down." Said. "I don't think I will," he said, some of his confidence returning, mistaking my calm for weakness. "I think this family's had enough lies for one lifetime, Walter. I think it's time the truth came out from under your porch." "You don't know a single thing about the truth," I told him. "I have proof," Douglas said, and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded manila envelope that he must have carried against his chest all afternoon, through the burgers and the toasts and the baby being passed around, waiting for his moment. He set it down on the table in front of Marcus like he was laying down a winning hand of cards. "Paternity results. I did the test myself, years ago, I've been sitting on it because I thought it wasn't my place. But watching you raise my son as your own for 38 years, Walter, I couldn't carry it anymore. He deserves to know where he comes from. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the flap of that envelope open. I watched my son, a man who could hold a scalpel steady over a beating heart without a tremor, unable to control his own fingers over a piece of paper. Renee was crying openly now. Tommy had set the baby in his wife's arms and come around the table to stand behind Marcus's chair, one hand on his brother's shoulder, as though he could physically hold him together. Michael Marcus, I said, catching myself, my old tongue slipping toward the name of a nephew before finding its way back. Look at me. Not at the paper. At me. He looked up. His eyes, so much like his mother's, were drowning. I am your father, I said. I have been your father since the morning I held you in that hospital nursery, and you wrapped your whole fist around one of my fingers and wouldn't let go. A father isn't a test tube, son. A father is every 3 a.m. fever, every stitched-up knee, every dollar I ever put toward your education instead of my own comfort. That's not a lie. That's the realest thing in this yard. You knew, Marcus said, and it wasn't quite a question. Didn't you? You knew. I felt something in my chest tighten, like a fist closing around my own heart. This was the moment, friend, the one I had dreaded for 38 years without ever letting myself think about it directly, the way you don't look straight at the sun. But I had made a promise to myself a long, long time ago, and I was not going to break it now, not even to save myself pain. I knew your mother made a mistake, a long time before you were born, I said quietly. One night, one terrible lapse in judgment. In a marriage that was struggling and young and stupid the way young marriages sometimes are. I found out about it not long after you came into this world. And I had a choice to make, Marcus. I could walk away from the woman I loved and the child in her arms, or I could choose you both, every single day, for the rest of my life. So, it's true, Douglas said, some triumph creeping back into his voice. You admit it. He's not your... Look at the date, Marcus, I said, ignoring him entirely, my eyes never leaving my son's face. Look at the date on that test. Marcus's eyes dropped back to the paper. He scanned it, his breathing shallow, and then he went very still. This says 2001, he said slowly, looking up, his brow furrowed in confusion. I was 13 years old in 2001. You and Mom you'd already been married for 14 years by then. The color drained from Douglas's face so fast I actually saw it happen, watched the blood retreat from his cheeks like a tide pulling back from shore. That's when I finally got it confirmed. Douglas stammered. I'd suspected for years, No, I said, and now something in my own voice had hardened into steel. You didn't suspect anything, Douglas, because there was nothing to suspect. You had that test run in 2001 because that was the year Carol finally told you once and for all in front of me that she had made her choice a long time ago and it would always be me. You couldn't accept it. So you went looking for a weapon instead. You paid some lab to tell you what you wanted to hear, and you have been carrying that lie around in your jacket pocket for 25 years, waiting for the exact moment it would do the most damage. The yard was so silent I could hear the wind moving through the maple leaves above us, the same tree I'd planted the week Marcus came home from that hospital. Why, Marcus said, and his voice had changed now, the confusion burning away into something harder, something that made me proud, even in the wreckage of that afternoon. Why do you think he raised me, Douglas? If I wasn't his, if he had any doubt at all, why would a man spend 38 years coaching my little league team and sitting up with me through chemo when I had leukemia at 9 years old and walking me down the aisle at my wedding? Why would he do all of that for another man's child? Because, I said, before Douglas could answer, there was never any other man's child in this family. There was only ever my son. I stood up then, slow, my knee complaining the way it always does these days, and I looked at Douglas Kane, 63 years of friendship standing between us like a bridge that had just been set on fire, and for the first time since the day he took that punch for me when we were 9 years old, I did not recognize the man in front of me. You wanted to burn my family down on my birthday, I said. You wanted to watch me lose everything in one afternoon because you couldn't stand watching me have it. I forgive a lot of things in this life, Douglas. End quote. I don't think I can forgive this, that. Renee stood up beside me, tears streaking down through the makeup she'd so carefully applied for the party, but her voice, when it came, was iron. "Get off my property," she said. "Get in your car and don't come back to this family. Not for Christmas, not for funerals, not for anything." Douglas looked around that yard at Renee's fury, at Tommy's clenched jaw, at his own godson standing up now, taller than him, staring him down with a contempt that must have cut deeper than any test result ever could. "You're not my father," Marcus said quietly, and something about the quiet made it land harder than shouting ever could have. "You're a bitter old man who couldn't stand losing. There's a difference, and I hope you spend whatever years you have left learning it." Douglas opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Whatever speech he'd rehearsed in his mirror hadn't accounted for this ending. He gathered his ruined envelope off the table, and I watched 63 years of friendship shuffle across my daughter's lawn and out through the side gate, and I have not seen him since. And friend, if I'm honest with you, I don't much care to. The party didn't end that afternoon, not really. It just changed shape. The guests who'd come for cake and lemonade drifted home with wide eyes and a story they'd be telling for years, and the family that was left folded in around the table like the petals of a flower closing at dusk. Marcus came and knelt down next to my chair the way he used to when he was small and wanted to show me a scraped knee, except now he was a 38-year-old surgeon with tears running freely down his face. And he took my hand in both of his. "I'm sorry," I told him, because I needed him to hear it, because I had carried the guilt of that secret for 38 years like a stone in my shoe I'd learned to walk around. "I should have told you myself, a long time ago, on my own terms, not like this, not with an audience. You told me every day of my life," Marcus said, his voice breaking. Every ball game, every stitch, every single day you got up and chose to be my father when you didn't have to be. That's not a secret, Dad. That's the whole truth. This," and he gestured at the envelope crumpled somewhere out on the grass. "This was never anything but paper." Renee wrapped her arms around both of us from behind. Tommy came around with the baby back in his arms, and he put his free hand on my shoulder and just stood there, not saying anything, because some things don't need saying. "I want to tell you what I told my son that evening, once the yard had emptied out and it was just my children and their families and me, sitting in the blue dusk light with the string lights still glowing in the maple tree. Because I think it's the only part of this story that actually matters. I told him that a father isn't the man who contributes a moment of biology to a life. A father is a decision you make once, in a hospital room, holding something small and helpless and entirely dependent on you, and then a decision you go on making, quietly, imperfectly, every single day after that, for as long as you're given breath to make it. Blood tells you where you came from. It doesn't tell you a single thing about who loves you. I'm 72 years old now, friend, and I've buried a wife and I've very nearly lost the one friendship I thought would outlast me, though I understand now it was never the friendship I believed it to be. I don't know how many birthdays I've got left in me, but I know that when I'm gone, nobody is going to remember how many nails I sold at that hardware store, or whether my porch step ever got fixed. They're going to remember a man who knelt on a lawn holding his son's hand, refusing to let a piece of paper tell either of them who they really were to each other. That, in the end, is the only inheritance that ever mattered. Not blood, not paper, just the choosing, over and over, every single day, to stay.